My name's Margie and I suppose you're here because I've had a fair bit of experience with my brother having a mental illness. My brother's name was Peter and unfortunately he's missing, believed suicided. Yeah, so he's been missing for about 15 years. He was diagnosed originally when he was about 16, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and later that diagnosis was changed to bipolar disorder, which kind of made a difference, but for our family we didn't have a lot of education and supports in helping him manage that illness, so we really only found out about the true diagnosis at the coroner's inquest after his death, and that was 12 years after he went missing. So the family has been through a lot. Pete was very lucky in some ways. He did have employment quite a bit of the time, and he actually got married about 3 years before he went missing. So he, unlike a lot of people with a serious mental illness, he had a relatively normal life, and then kind of sometimes out of nowhere he would have an episode. So we as a family would, like a lot of other families, be the main support. So we would help him get to hospital if he wasn't already hospitalised, and then we would, certainly I know myself, I would visit him as often as I could and provide as much love and care that I knew, because really, apart from medical management, what people need is simple personal connection and support, because having mental illness can often make you feel like a failure. I actually had to learn that I couldn't visit him every day for my sake. I found it too distressing, because there's two things happening when someone's ill. You're seeing an illness emerge out of the person you know, but you're also trying to connect with the person you know and reassure them that they'll be okay, thinking yourself, I don't know if they're going to be okay. Particularly if the episodes start getting very close together. So from a very young age, if he was 16, I was still at school when that was happening. And then when his illness really escalated at about the age of 19, that's, I suppose a pivotal time for a teenager anyway, but I felt like it was a baptism of fire for me as well. We were fortunate. Pete was very, I hate using the word, but he was very compliant. So Pete took his medication right up until the end. He was taking his medication. He was trying very hard, but life got too difficult. A missing persons case is particularly complicated because I think the biggest impact of the whole thing was the shock of him going missing, because he'd never actually done anything like that before. We actually conducted a very intensive search for him. That was actually, quite bizarrely, it was a fantastic thing that the family did that. We all were involved in that, so we felt like we had done everything we could. And I remember myself being particularly motivated to knowing that we had a limited time to get hold of him and to track him, because he literally went missing off a train in the country and we knew nothing. And by the end of our week of searching, we found out where he got off and what he did after that, but then the trace was lost. So that the impact straight after his missing was the shock, which is kind of like, for me, the first impact of grief. But I think grief is something that comes in waves and comes in and out. So if I put myself back to that time, the rawness of that comes back. After a while, depression hit in for me. I was just, I suppose, just overwhelmed by it. So the energy of the search had been, as I said, quite a good thing to do, but then there was nothing. There was this mystery. I got so depressed, I was suicidal, and I can remember feeling I just wanted the pain to go away and just wanting to go to sleep, wanting to escape, but I didn't want to die. I wanted to just I just wanted to escape. I was fortunate enough to have a very good GP, and he, after seeing me a couple of times, referred me to a psychiatrist. Yeah. So I then went on a spookily similar journey to my brother, and now I actually have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder myself. But it's a remarkably good story because my illness is very well managed, and maybe it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had a brother with illness, but my life is a very full one. I live very well most of the time. I've had a number of episodes. My diagnosis was only a year after Pete went missing, so I've been living with bipolar for 14 years. When you actually are first diagnosed or becoming unwell even, it's very frightening because you realise you're one of those people. And I often talk about that when I give talks, because we use all sorts of derogatory language for people with mental illness. You know, they're a schizo, a psycho, a loony, and it's very hurtful. You know, that person has a name, that person has a family, that person has a life, and they might live with an illness, but they're not a schizophrenic, they're someone living with schizophrenia. I think sometimes you need a lot of help. In my case, I actually did need counselling, and I really wish we'd had more supports before he actually went missing. We really never thought, and in those days, even though it's a short time ago, the particular psychiatrist he was seeing wasn't what I call progressive. He didn't really think that he should include the family in treatment. I passionately believe that a family is often the unit picking up the pieces, and that it's a great idea to have them involved if the person who has the illness is happy about it. You don't have to sit in the doctor's session, but it is helpful sometimes for doctors to have a session with the family and talk about those things. Well, you're well, you know, the person is well now, what do you think we can do if something goes wrong? Give out their card, literally, so they can, the family can contact them and have a chat without them divulging anything confidential. The sort of support that I think families also need is not just someone listening to what stresses they may have, but actually very practical strategies in how to manage someone when they come up with odd behaviours or symptoms of illness. And families need, I think, to be educated about what actual symptoms to look for. And if you're unfortunate enough to lose someone to suicide, then you kind of, after a period of time, whatever's right for you, I think you have to learn the limitations of how much you can go over the grief. And some people respond well to counselling, some don't, but it's worth trying because it certainly worked for me. It would be great if problems to do with mental illness or suicide could be normalised. A lot of people talk about stigma, and you know, it is rife. It is very hard. In fact, I never thought of picking up the phone, even when I was very depressed, and I sincerely wish I had. I now run education sessions for Lifeline to do with living with a mental illness, and I often say that I don't know why I didn't, but I didn't, and I took the hard road, and there's a much easier way out. And often when I actually worked as a counsellor, the first thing I would chat about was, gee, you've done a great job ringing in. And people were really surprised to hear that and didn't realise that that in itself is a great achievement.